you?
Good. Welcome. Great to have you. Great to have you join us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure. I'm here with one of our alums, the class of 2016.
Who's?
Olivia,
yeah.
Show your face.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Professor Rowe.
Hi there, Olivia.
You know Professor Rowe?
Yeah.
Yes.
Set this up.
So we have the Kenyon tentacles all over.
Good morning and welcome. Last year, Kenyon College adopted a revised mission statement, which reads, "At Kenyon, we build strong foundations for lives of purpose and consequence. We harness the transformative power of a liberal arts education, engaging in spirited, informed, and collaborative inquiry to form a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the world and all who inhabit it." Leopoldo López, a 1993 graduate of Kenyon, is an extraordinary exemplar of living a life of purpose and consequence. His efforts to defend and reclaim democracy in Venezuela are grounded in the liberal traditions of fundamental dignity for all, personal agency, and reasoned deliberation and dialogue. His efforts show that grappling with enduring questions of the human condition and how to best realize humanity's potential take place not simply in the seminar room, but in how we use our knowledge to build communities in which every person has a sense of full belonging and the tools to reach their full potential. His efforts underscore the challenges and sacrifices that democracy and liberal ideals can sometimes demand. Leo is a founder of Voluntad Popular, Popular Will, and was one of Venezuela's most popular politicians when he was arrested in 2014 for leading pro-democracy protests against the country's increasingly authoritarian regime. He was subsequently sentenced to nearly 14 years in prison. In 2015, Amnesty International named López a prisoner of conscience. He was released to house arrest in July 2017. And on April 30th, 2019, he left his home during an uprising against the government of Nicolas Maduro and sought shelter in the Spanish embassy in Caracas. He later escaped to Spain, where he now lives with his family in exile. Leo's life and life's work underscore that human liberty, the ability of people to lead self-directed lives freed from both dogma and domination by others, ceases to exist wherever the powerful can place themselves or their actions beyond question or reproach, or deny to others the fundamental human dignity and political equality that we all share. And we are pleased to be able to welcome him virtually back here to the Hill in Gambier. Before we begin this morning's event, I'd like to thank Lindsay Colopy, Annie Gordon, Andrea Leckleitner, and Nancy Powers and David Rowe for organizing and setting up this event, as well as members of Leo's family, Adriana López Vermut, his sister, and Antioneta López, his mother. So I now turn things over to Professor of Political Science and Director of Kenyon's Center for the Study of American Democracy, David Rowe. And Dave, you're muted.
You know, you would think after months and months of Zoom that you would know these simple things. But anyway, hi Leo, it's great to see you. It's to talk with you again. And what I'd like to do today is first just talk about some of your personal experiences and and then move on to sort of your life's work. But also, very quickly bring in the questions from the audience that are inevitably going to pop up so that we can get a real dialogue between you and the audience going, because I know a lot of people are very interested in what you've been doing. And where I'd like to start is really, in a sense, sort of to get a sense of how you're doing. You and I have known one another for about 2.5 years now. We've worked on different projects involving the college, and those 2.5 years have been quite consequential for you. When we first met, you were in house arrest. Then about 2 years ago, you were freed from house arrest during a brief uprising, which looked like a moment of hope. And I know that now you're in exile, something that I don't think that you ever intended or ever wanted. And so, my first question is, simply, how are you doing? What's it been like for the past 2.5 years? What's the hardest thing that you've had to deal with? And what is it that makes you hopeful?
Oh, well, first, I want to thank Kenyon, and I want to thank all of you who put this event. And I want to start by saying that I'm very grateful of the opportunity I had and the education I was given at Kenyon College. Kenyon is a great place, and it has given me tools all along this long path to freedom that we've been traveling throughout the last 20 years. It's been very difficult, but Kenyon has always been very close to every moment in the decision-making process, in thinking about things, in thinking about issues that are abstract when I was at Kenyon, and that became very close and very human and vital to my day-to-day. Issues like freedom, like democracy, like human rights, the rule of law, are things I learned at Kenyon theoretically, but I have been faced with these issues in the real life of facing a dictatorship. So I want to just start by saying that I'm very thankful and grateful of the education I was given at Kenyon College, and of all the support that I was given by Kenyon all throughout my 7 years of freedom confined. Ever since I was put into prison, Kenyon was very active. My classmates, my friends, faculty members, and it's been great. So I want to start by thanking all of you, and thanking all of you who are in this call today. Well, you asked me how am I doing, and well, I'm in one dimension, I'm doing better than I was doing before, because I'm able to share simple things with my family that I was not able to do. I have 3 kids. Manuela is 11, Leo is 8, and Federica, who was conceived in prison, she's 3.5. And for 4 years, my eldest kids were forced to day-to-day in prison. They would go every 15 days to prison, face the military, face the hardships of having their father in prison. Then our house was converted into a prison. It was surrounded by the military and the political police, and they were faced with this very tough reality. So now I'm very grateful that I can, go to the park, play soccer with my kid, play the guitar. I see President has a guitar in his office as well. I can play the guitar with my eldest daughter. And so in that dimension, I'm happy, but I don't feel free. Many people tell me, well, you're free now. And that's not true, because for me, and this is something that I've thought about a lot, for me, freedom is not an individual condition, but it's a condition of my country, my homeland. And I get the burden of still facing a dictatorship that has had terrible consequences to the Venezuelan people. So I wake up in Madrid. Now I'm in South America, but day to day I wake up in Madrid and I go to bed in Caracas. I use Zoom. I might be one of the individuals in the planet Earth that have used most Zoom, because I've been using Zoom intensively since 2017. And I actually, this is an anecdote, I told a friend of mine that graduated with me at Harvard. I told him last year, he's working at Wall Street. And I said, hey, I don't do these things, but you should invest in Zoom because I know about confinement. I can give you some good tips. And he told me, people at Wall Street are very stubborn. And he said, well, you do what you know what to do, and I'll do what I know what to do. I called him 3 months after that and said, did you invest in Zoom? And he said, no, well, it increased like 300%. You should have heard my experience as a confined expert But then, so I go to bed in Caracas, and I'm always connected with our people, the people of our party, of our coalition, of everything that we are doing in order to make freedom a reality for the Venezuelan people. What we want is very simple, but when you have a dictatorship, it becomes a very difficult task. We want free elections. We want free elections. We want freedom, free elections, and democracy for the Venezuelan people. And that's what we dedicate our lives to. And that's my purpose in life. And it hasn't been easy. I've been in moments of height, and I've been moments of very low. And I've learned when I was reading at Kenyon from many of the experiences of people that wrote about difficult moments, that you need to keep your focus in the purpose. And that has been something that has helped me all throughout these difficult years.
So you mentioned you've had, so are you willing to share what some of the high points and the low points have been?
Well, I've come to realize that sometimes you wish for things in life, and sometimes you get it, but you don't get everything that you want at the same time. So I've had heights in popular support, for example, but I was confined and not being able to be in the streets of Venezuela. I have been at moments of heights in terms of my family, like it's happening now, but it's a moment of low in terms of my strive for freedom that I want to be in Venezuela. So it's been a long march, as Mandela said, a long march to freedom, and it's something that one needs to be. At least I'm very conscious of this. That you are sometimes at a moment of great support, and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you are in a good positions, and sometimes you're not. And what the key is, at least for me personally, is to keep focus in the purpose. You know, what's the purpose? Why we do this, and why we are willing to go through many struggles and sacrifices. It's because there is a purpose. Without a purpose, none of this has any meaning. And for me, the purpose is to work towards freedom of my country. So I have been in difficult, very difficult situations. I spent 4 years in a military prison. Most of that time I was in solitary confinement. I spent weeks without even expressing a word. I spent years without electricity at night, without having light from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And that was very, very difficult. But when I was there, I had a great sense of purpose, great sense. I never regretted what we did in terms of calling for the Venezuelan people to go out to the streets and protest for freedom and democracy. And I never regretted of presenting myself voluntarily to face the injustice of Venezuela. So that gave me a great sense of purpose. And to tell you the truth, there is a spiritual dimension in this, at least for me. And I'm very respectful of the beliefs of everybody, of anybody. But I personally found a great support in the spiritual dimension of making things, making sense out of things. And that gave me a great level of introspection and having that sense of purpose and giving sense to suffering and difficult moments. So for me, that was important.
Did you ever despair? I mean, for me, it's almost, it stretches my imagination to put myself in the places where you've been. And I could see myself, just despairing, feeling isolated, alone. The universe has moved on. And so there's that temptation to simply surrender to despair. Did you ever confront that? And how did you get past that, if you did?
Well, of course I confronted that scenario, and that's a thought. Let me share with you something that became a mantra for me when I went to prison. I was a politician of the streets. that's what I dedicated. I was mayor between 2000 and 2008, and I was going to become the governor of the city of Caracas, and I had great support. But the regime didn't allow me to present myself to that election. So I dedicated my time and my purpose to go around Venezuela and put together a new political movement with young leaders, with students, with union leaders and other people. So I was, from Tuesday to Saturday, I was around Venezuela in the streets. And when I came to prison, I knew that my fight was no longer in the streets, but was in my head. And I was very conscious of that. I knew that the terrain in which I was fighting was my head and my psychology. And I knew that they were going to do many things to try to stir away my focus from the purpose of having Venezuela, having elections and a free country. So yes, I've faced moments of great despair, but it has to do with purpose. Again, what's meaningful for you in life? And I think this is true for everybody in a sense. I mean, what's meaningful for me, of course, is that has to do with where I was born and the reality of my country and the reality of what I decided to dedicate myself to. But I think this applies to anybody. It applies to somebody who dedicates themselves to the academy, to the medicine, to business, to literature, to whatever. It's what's your purpose. And I think that I feel blessed, and I thank God that that I have that sense of purpose. That sense of purpose doesn't mean that you're going to be comfortable, that you are going to be happy, that you are going to be that you're going to have everything that you want, or things are going to go the way you want. But having a sense of purpose is that you come to realize that this is what I want to do, this is what I want to dedicate my life to, and come to terms with the obstacles that have to do with that purpose. And for me, that has been the stepping stone of stability, purpose.
So, well, let's talk about that then for a second. So where did this sense of purpose come from? Right. I know that you had when you were a student here, and I only hear this from other people because this was before my time, that you were a bit of a rabble rouser at times when you were at Kenyon, and I see that has continued. But being a rabble rouser as a college student and then putting yourself on the line and confronting a brutal regime, those are two different things, right? And so how did you come to the sense of purpose, knowing that promoting and protecting democracy in Venezuela was your life's calling? Was it something that you always, in a sense, innately felt, or did it just grow on you over time?
I always wanted to dedicate myself to public service in Venezuela. Always. I had the blessing of having an education in the US. I went to Kenyon and then I went to Harvard. I spent 9 years abroad, but I always knew that I wanted to go back to Venezuela. And I knew I wanted to dedicate myself to public service. I was brought up in a country with great levels of inequality, with great levels of difficulties and poverty. Today, we are a much poorer country than what we were when I was born. But that's something that shocked me, and I wanted to do something about bringing opportunities to the large majority of Venezuelans. And that has been in my conviction ever since I was a kid. And when I was at Kenyon, I took the opportunity of doing what we could. And we put together a movement. At that moment, it was called Ashes, Active Students Helping the Earth Survive. And I remember in 1991, when there was the first war with Iraq and Kuwait, we did a protest. This was in February of 91, and it was 15 of us, and we put together a protest, and we took down the alarms of all the dorms at exactly the same time that the first bombs came down a month before. And we had our statement, and Pierce Hall and in all the dining rooms, we sent our statement, and we were caught. I remember the head of security at that time was Tom Woosley, a good friend of mine, because I was always in problems at Kenyon. And my friend Pete Pomerville, from San Francisco, he made the mistake of presenting his ID in Mount Vernon when we were doing the copies of our statement. So we were caught, and he was caught, and the 15 of us showed to the dean, and we said, this was our commitment. This is what we did. We wanted to protest against the war, and this is what we were doing it. And for me, that was an important moment. We were expelled for, I believe it was 2 months. I went to Pittsburgh, and I worked at a steel mill as a volunteer. And I was, again, with a sense of purpose, with believing in what we were doing at that moment. So that has been my attitude ever since I have memory. And in a way, Kenyon really helped me to have the tools, the ideas, the way of thinking about these larger problems that we face: inequality, freedom, democracy, rule of law. That has helped me to give some sense to all of the different steps. I became mayor between 2000 and 2008, and we had a great experience. We were very young. I was 28 when I became mayor, and we had a team of people that were all very young with good education, in the sense that they were very technical, and we did a lot of things. Again, it's having the sense of purpose. I know I'm coming back again to this idea, but I believe that this is very important. And I believe that a liberal arts education helps to have that internal discussion with yourself about what you want to do in life, about what you want to dedicate your life to. And for me, Kenyon was a good place to have all those discussions and internal reflections.
Well, I just want you to know that and I think you've talked with the people who did this, that Ashes lives on, that it has reconstituted itself.
That's great.
There was you spoke to one of my seminars a couple of years ago, and the students reached out to you, and it's up and it's running. Although both of them will be graduating this year, so hopefully it will continue on.
I hope it does. And today, this was 25 years ago, almost 30 years ago. And well, I feel old when I'm saying this, but time passes by and we can't do anything about that. But Ashes was an initiative at a moment when all the environmental issues were not as important as they are now. And we were very active in promoting all the environmental issues. And we did things. We did community service. We did seminars. We also had bands coming in, reggae bands coming in fresh in front of Lewis Hall, and we were able to. We were inspired, in a way, by Greenpeace, and they were the activist way of presenting the defense of the environment by Greenpeace. But it was a great experience, and I'm very glad to hear that continues to happen. And if I can help in any way, more than willing to.
Okay. Well, one of the students who founded it, Graham Ball, just popped up on the chat and is thanking you for inspiring him. The other major student was Helen Cunningham, who helped get all of this going. But I want to drill down for a second, because I see a lot of activity, but I also want to understand what makes you tick, right? So you have this purpose to help people. Where does that come from? You say you've always known it. Have you thought about where that comes from? What is it in your soul that says, look, my life's calling is to help others, to do these things?
Well, I was brought up in a family where the discussion of Venezuela and our problems was always present. So I think in a way that had an impact in my upbringing. And there was one anecdote that really ticked me. When I was being brought up, there was this anecdote of my great-grandfather who went to prison for 14 years. The same time that I was sentenced to. And I was very, very intrigued by this. This was the 1970s and the 1980s, when Venezuela was a very stable democracy. And it was a moment when we took democracy for granted. We took freedom for granted. So it really shocked me that you could go to prison and go through great levels of suffering because of an idea. And this was, my great grandfather went to prison, and his wife had to flee, and she went to New York, the New York of the beginning of the century. She put together a small pension, and they dedicated all their efforts to give a good education to their kids. So my grandfather and his brother went to Columbia University with a scholarship, and his brother went to MIT, was the first Venezuelan to graduate as a geological engineer from MIT, all of their education with a scholarship. And that story really shocked me as a life with meaning. This was a person I didn't know, but I heard a lot about him. That he was willing to go to prison and to defend his ideas. And I saw this experience as something of the past, but then it became, in a weird way, something in my very present. And when I decided to go to prison voluntarily, because I had the opportunity of fleeing Venezuela or to reaching an agreement with the dictatorship as they wanted, because they raided my house and they were threatening me through my wife and my family that I was going to be killed, and that I should turn myself in a way that the dictatorship wanted. And I decided to take the risk. And in a way, I always had that story of my great grandfather present. That might not be the only thing, but it was something that was always there. And I always wanted to dedicate myself to the public service. That is something that really was there. That ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be involved in politics and public service. And in a way, it's because of all those, the upbringing of always talking about Venezuela, or problems and or potential as well. So I think family has a lot to do with that, at least in my case, in the upbringing and what I was exposed to in the conversations of every time we were to dinner. And it wasn't boring. I don't want to play this as boring. It was interesting. And I was always invited by my parents to read the newspapers, to discuss what was in the public discussion in the newspapers. So, I think that helped.
And what about religion? Because you've alluded to religion a little bit before about helping you in managing sort of despair and maintaining hope. But does religion also play a role in your deeper sense of purpose? In part because I think if I understand correctly, your first graduate school was divinity school.
Yes. Well, I'm a Catholic, like most Latin Americans, and I'm a mechanical Catholic in a way. You go about your religion in a very mechanical way, in the sense that you are baptized and you go to your first communion, you go to the sacraments, and there's some things that you do when you have a need or when you have a fear. You pray in a certain way. But when I was in prison, I was put in a different level of spirituality, because for the first time, I was faced with the opportunity of praying, of really praying. And in a way, prayers are an introspection. I think that every religion gives you the opportunity of having that deep introspection where you have a conversation with God through whatever channels, through Jesus or directly, or in a way, it's all about the same introspection that you have about, what are the things that are valuable to you, and what are the needs that you have, the fears, but especially what to be thankful about. I remember talking to a priest when I was mayor. There was a great priest in my municipality, and I had lunch with him once a month. And one time he told me, he said, "Listen, Leo, you pray for three reasons. You pray for need, for fear, or to be thankful. And of the three, the most important one is to be thankful." So I decided when I was in prison every day to thank God and to have an internal prayer and thank God for everything that I've been privileged of getting, of my parents, my family, my upbringing, my education at Kenyon, my education at Harvard, my kids, my political party. And then I started to thank simple things, like when I was able to see the sunrise, or when I was able to hear the birds sing, or when I was able to see the stars from the window of my prison cell. So I started to get a different sense of what was meaningful. And I never prayed for my freedom. And I was very cautious of that, because I knew that that could be a trap in putting myself into an expectation that was not in my hands, and that if I put all of my will and my expectations in an idea that didn't come through, that was a recipe for frustration. So I decided to take this simple advice of a priest that I had a conversation many years before, that I should just pray and think. And that gave me an opportunity of think of my life, and in the past, in the present, and in the future. And yes, for me, spiritual dimension was very important. And to tell you the truth, this is something that I missed in a way, because I don't have the same spiritual intensity now that I had when I was in prison. And so this is a way, going back to this idea that you never have all the things that you want at the same time. Sometimes, you might have a lot of things that you expect in life, but you're not going to have them all at the same time. So, I had a very intense spiritual experience when I was in prison. But now that I am free, I don't have that. So I think this is an idea that if you come to realize that, you can have a better way of going day by day. You can have things, but you're not going to have all the things at the same time. Some people work all their lives to have money, and to have a lot of money. And sometimes they have a lot of money, but then when they reach a point when they have a lot of money, they don't have a family, or they don't have a good personal life, and so on and so on. There could be many examples of this. Well, you need to come to terms that this is what life is about, and for me, this has been a very important learning experience.
Okay, so so how did the experience of change you, of being isolated, being in prison, being removed in a way, being removed from sort of your active purpose, right? Because the whole point of prison is to keep you from pursuing what you're driven to do. So how did that experience of being constrained, confined, at the mercy of others? Because it wasn't just that the universe was conspiring against you. It was that people, active people, were conspiring against you. How did that change you?
Well, a couple of things about this. I never experienced hatred before I went to prison. I never experienced the real dark side of human beings before I went to prison. And I was face to face with that. I was faced with people that were determined to make my life miserable. And this was something that really strengthened my character. Different people take prison in different ways. I took my experience in a very defiant way. I was always stepping up to the custodians, the guards, and I was always I always told them, with respect, we're friends. But if you raise your voice, I'll raise your voice, and if you push me, I'll push you, and I'm willing to do whatever needs to happen. But you are not going to irrespect me, because in order to irrespect, it's not that you want to do it, but if you can do it, and you cannot do it because I will not allow that to happen. And so that I had that attitude when I was in prison, and I think that was again to continue what I was doing when I was free. I could only do it through other people, and the only people that would visit me were my wife Lillian, my mother, my sister, and my kids. They were the only people I saw for 4 years, because my father had to go into exile as well. I didn't see my father for 7 years, and I had to speak to the people in my party and to colleagues from other political parties through my wife. And I am very lucky to have an extraordinary wife. She was not a politician. She was not dedicated to public life, but she had to step up to the challenge. And I told her before we got married, I told her, listen, I love you and I want to marry you, but I want to be very sincere. This is what I want to dedicate my life to. And if you're willing to take the risk with me and to take everything that this means, we should get married. And she knew that this was a life that we were going to have with a lot of struggle. And she stood up to the challenge, and she became the voice of Venezuela abroad. And she met with presidents all over the world, and she met with people in parliaments all over the world, NGOs, media, and she was able to present the case, not just my case, but the case of a country that was dying and that continues to be in that way. So even though I was not able to actively speak with people, I was very lucky to have my wife to be my voice. So that's how I came to terms with this reality of being isolated.
Okay. One more question along this line, and then we'll shift gears slightly. And I'm hoping to bring in their comments that are starting to come in and bring in some of those as well. But one of the things, in a liberal arts education that you try and do in the classroom, speaking as a professor, is to get students to step into the shoes of other people, right? The idea is that multiple perspectives help us understand the world better and better manage it, and to create a world that is better at the end. That's partly the purpose of our education. And that's really easy to do when these are people that you feel some affinity for, right? That you want to have solidarity with the oppressed. So you put yourselves in the shoes of the oppressed, and you can, feel some sense of empathy or solidarity. But it's always struck me that one of the most important ways of taking perspective is to take perspective of people that you don't share an affinity with, or people who are trying to harm you, or people who are actually, as you've experienced, doing in some sense evil. And so, what in your experiences, what underlies the hatred that you said that you experienced, the harm that you said you experienced, that what underlies regimes that they structure themselves around such severe oppression?
I think that when this type of regimes start, they don't have this as an objective, but they don't have the capacity of stopping evil from becoming a reality, from being present at all levels, because they start losing popular support, and they need to control society through repression and the manipulation of justice. So this is a process of deterioration of what we hold as important values, like rule of law and freedom. And this is what happened in Venezuela. So I try not to generalize in terms of all the people that at some point supported the political movement of the dictatorship that had popular support at a moment in Venezuela. But we try to focus, at least I try to focus in very concrete people where the problem lies. And I think that the exercise of not doing politics with hate is very important. And I have the great opportunity of talking to our people about not having hate and resentment as the motivation for what we do. And that's very present in politics in Venezuela and in many places. Hatred and resentment are very strong feelings to motivate political movements. And I am convinced that this should not be the sentiments that motivate what we should do. So we need to substitute those sentiments with others. Empathy, as you say, and the idea of tolerance and freedom are ideals that I think that should always be present. But then you need to be faced with concrete realities. And I'll share with you an experience that has to do with your question. When I was in prison, I did what's called the spiritual exercises of San Ignacio de Loyola. And at a point, they ask you to pray for your enemies. And I was faced with this exercise. And at first, I was not able to go through with it. So I spent 3 days trying to go through with this. And then finally, I was able to go through with an exercise that has to pray for your enemies. And that gave me a lighter weight in the way I felt about things. So I give a lot of importance to this. But I think that there needs to be a balance between not being motivated by hate on one side and not being tolerant and prisoner of those who repress. I am a strong believer of uprising and the voice of freedom. I am a strong believer of protest. I am a strong believer in putting a face to power. I'm a strong believer of breaking all the mechanisms that become the tools of oppression for a regime like the one we are facing. But I am also a very strong believer that the motivation should not be hate, that the motivation should be hope. And for me, this is not a theoretical issue. This is a day-to-day issue. When I was at Kenyon, these were all theories. I read about all the poli-sci theories about freedom, about rule of law, about human rights, about democracy and the making of democracy and all that. But it was all theoretical at that point, and it was very useful, but all theoretical. But then we were faced as a society with the crumbling of democracy, of freedom. Freedom is not one thing. Freedom is the sum of many things that you expect from a society. And we were able to experience how freedom was taken away from our day-to-day in Venezuela. So I was faced with this, putting the ideas and the motivations for changing our reality.
Yeah, I find it very interesting, especially when you said, look, that evil doesn't come fully formed, that it often starts, if I can paraphrase you, in the desire to do good, right? But then we make compromises about that, and then it can snowball, which I think is really important. I think there's a fundamental human truth in that, right? That sort of too strongly desiring one thing can sometimes lead to great injustice. There's a lot of interest among people to hear what you have to say about the current situation in Venezuela. And so I want to switch gears slightly and talk about not so much at this deeper philosophical level where we've been chatting back and forth, but more what you're doing right now. One of the first questions that came out is from Kate Blanchard, class of '92, who just wants to know, where should she go to learn more about the present situation in Venezuela? Are there journalists that you could recommend for U.S. citizens to follow, or where should our news come from your advice?
I don't have a specific journalist. I can commit to give you a set of articles that I think that can give you a good idea. But I think that in order to understand the current situation of Venezuela, one needs to start by the humanitarian situation of our country. We have a country that's dying, literally. We have a country where we were in the 1970s, 1980s, when I was being brought up, as I said before, the most prosperous country in Latin America. And today, according to the IMF, Venezuela has become the poorest country in Latin America, even surpassing Haiti, which was the poorest country for decades in Latin America. 90% of the people in Venezuela are under poverty. 60% of the Venezuelan people are under extreme poverty. Almost 7 million Venezuelans, like myself, I'm part of that group, had to flee our country. That's a bit below a third of our population. There is no running water. All of the Venezuelan cities and towns have electricity shortages every day. Almost 30% of the country is cooking with leña, ¿cómo se dice? With wood. We have the country with the highest level of hydrocarbon reserves in the world, and there's no gasoline in the country. And I can go on and on and on and on about the social and humanitarian situation in Venezuela. So I would advise that you read the reports that are coming out from the UN, the Human Rights Commission, the Human Rights Council, that the reports that are coming out from the OAS, the reports that are coming out from the ICC, the International Criminal Court, reports that are very concrete, that are very supported about the dire situation of the Venezuelan people. And one needs to understand that that suffering of millions of people has an origin, and that the origin is political. The origin is not a war. The origin is not a natural tragedy. The origin is political, and the solution is political as well. So the solution to that suffering of millions of people that is impacting other countries in Latin America can only be political, in the sense that it can only start to change if we bring democracy to Venezuela.
So what would you say then to, because there are some people who are your critics, and what would you say to them that sort of the solution that you propose, and in particular the degree to which you rely on the international community, the United States, or support from the United States and other countries, really just allies you with sort of a, how do I want to put this, a capitalist and imperialist past that is partly responsible for the situation that you now describe? I mean, how would you answer to someone who makes that argument to you?
Well, I would answer by saying that if you are a true believer of human rights, you understand that human rights have no borders. And after World War II, there was a commitment of the world to sign the Declaration of Human Rights. And the most significant aspect of that declaration was that human rights have no borders. And if you are willing to defend human rights truthfully, you need to be committed for the defense of human rights anywhere in the world. And I am convinced that in order to face the hardships of a dictatorship that is a criminal organization in Venezuela, and I can explain with great levels of detail why I am saying this, there needs to be the support of other governments, parliaments, and public opinion. There is absolutely no way that we can solve the crisis in Venezuela only among Venezuelans. I would have liked that was not the situation. But this is a situation that today is in a political and in a geopolitical chessboard where Venezuela is part of this. Maduro is still there because he has the support of China, of Iran, of Russia, of Turkey, of Cuba, to name the main countries that are supporting Maduro. And what type of support is he getting from these countries? Well, he's getting military support, he's getting military personnel, he's getting support in the ¿cómo se dice? Lavado de dinero, in the money laundering of the funds that come from corruption. They're getting support in intelligence, in the manipulation of social media, and I can go on and on. And what type of support do we get? We get diplomatic support, basically. We get a support that mainly maintains itself in the declarations level. We are very grateful from the type of support that we have gotten from countries that have committed to promote social programs and to give us some tools to maintain organizations of a civil society in Venezuela. But by no means you can compare the type of support that Maduro is getting from from the countries that are willing to do whatever it takes to maintain a cluster of organized crime and authoritarian regime in order to make a counterweight to the United States in the American continent, to the type of support that we get from the countries. We're grateful of the support that we get, but by no means is a support that is equivalent. And yes, we need the support. And if you go back in history, it's like saying, well, Europeans should solve their problem with Hitler. And this was a discussion in the US, but the problem was not Hitler and the problem was not Europe. The problem became a worldwide problem. And that's why the United States had to step in and to face evil and to face a reality that for many years they didn't want to be engaged. And at the end, they needed to be engaged. And why is this? Because at some times, what happens elsewhere ends up affecting you. And I do believe in the commitment of countries to defend democracy. And to be very honest with you, I think today the idea of democracy is orphaned. There is a very little commitment to defend democracy as an ideal. When I was being brought up in the 80s, the idea of democracy putting its face against communism was very present, and the ideal of defending and promoting democracy as the best of all the bad systems of government, as Churchill said, was something that was very present. But that today is not happening. I think democracy has become relativized, and I think that even Democrats are willing to be tolerant to authoritarian regimes. And this idea of isolating countries that are being authoritarian and that people are suffering the consequences of authoritarian countries are being faced with arguments like we should not step into that problem because it's not a problem. Yes, it's a problem. If you believe in democracy, it is your problem. If you believe in freedom, it is your problem. If you believe in human rights, it is your problem, because these are universal values. You cannot maintain your commitment to freedom, democracy, human rights, and rule of law in the borders of your country. I mean, if you take that position, you are being not only inconsequential, but you are not being coherent with what these values are. Because these are values that once you embrace them, you need to embrace them universally. You believe, I believe in freedom for all human beings, and this is what the Declaration this is what the United States is all about. The United States, the founding fathers basically said, we are all created equal. All, not Americans, all created equal, black and white. And I know this is a big issue in the US, because this is an issue that needs to still be resolved in the US. But this is a very strong idea. We are all created equal, and we need to all have the same rights, and we need to all support that all people need to be owners of their rights. And I do ask for democracies around the world to step up to the challenge to face what is happening in Venezuela. And I understand the critics, and I would love to debate and to go and do this debate, because well, for us, if we don't convince other countries to help us in order to bring about freedom and democracy, we will be unfortunately facing decades of suffering, hunger, and strife for the Venezuelan people.
Okay, there are a couple of ways I think would be interesting to go here, but one is just, what's your take on why democracy has been, as you put it, relativized? Why is it that we no longer support, and by we I mean sort of the broader set of democratic countries and people within them, that many of us no longer support democracy as this kind of ideal about how you ought to structure society? What's underneath that, and from your view?
Well, this is a very important issue to really try to understand. I think that democracy stopped being an ideal worth defending. Maybe the end of the Cold War had something to do with that there was no counterpart or real counterpart to the idea of democracy. I also think that there has been the crumbling of democratic values from within democracy, where we relativize democracy and the focus is put in other issues that can only be achieved through democracy, but democracy as an ideal becomes relativized. And I'm very worried about this because I think that authoritarian countries do have a plan to undermine democracy. And this is something that you have seen in the US when you have in the elections of 2016 and 2020, the Russians meddling with your elections, or the Russians going to take part into the Barcelona affair in Spain, or in Brexit, and of course in Venezuela. You have Iran financing movements that are against democracies. So I think that authoritarian countries do have a plan to undermine democracy, but democracies and the leadership of democratic countries are not willing to step up to the challenge and say, we believe in democracy and we are willing to defend the idea and the consequences, and we're willing to take the consequences of defending the idea of democracy. And I think there is a lot of tolerance to authoritarianism. I think that there is a lot of tolerance to authoritarian regimes because of economic realities, or because of geopolitical equilibriums. And I think that needs to change. Of course, I have a position from the trench, from the first level of a trench where, democracy is not an ideal, it's not something that is far away, it's our day-to-day life. I cannot go to my country, I cannot see my people. I have friends that are in jail today. I have friends that have been assassinated. I have friends that have been forced to go into exile. So I have lived in a very different way the idea of defending democracy. But I do speak out to all of you, especially in the US, that this is not about Democrats or Republicans. This is not about left or right. This is something that it's above that. This is something that needs to unify, the left and the right. This is about freedom. This is about the core values of the greatest democracy of history, that is the United States. And you are also being questioned your own democracy from within. And I think that this is a very important moment to start rethinking about how far you are willing to go to defend and promote democracy, and not just to become critics of your own internal situation, but go even to a higher level and say, what's democracy about, and how we are willing to make it better.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting because, as you framed it, right, that we all of these different countries, we all have the tendency to see our problems as internal in our own, and to focus on the trees rather than the forest. But the forest is a global sort of assault on democracy, democratic values, democratic liberalism that we see in Venezuela, we see it in Europe, we see it in the United States. But so this raises the question, right? Are there lessons that we here in the United States should learn from Venezuela's experience?
Yes, I do. I do believe that there are lessons. For example, when you relativize the rule of law, for example, when there is mingling in the autonomy of the judicial system, when freedom of speech becomes relativized as well, when the public debate becomes a debate from the trenches, and the attack of individuals rather than the support of ideas, and populism. Populism is not something that is it's not a monopoly of the right or the left. It's there, and it's a movement that looks to undermine democracy with false ideas and false promises. And we have seen this in Venezuela. Venezuela is a laboratory of the undermining of democracy from within and from without. And we can tell you that, just to give you an example, in 2008, I was disqualified to run for office. And I was going to become the governor of Caracas with great levels of support. So I decided to go out of Venezuela to take my case to the Inter-American Human Rights Court. And I went to the US, I went to Europe, I went to Brazil, to Argentina, and I spoke about this. And I said, this is not going to, I am here not because I want to become a candidate, because that's not going to happen, but I want to put the alert that Venezuela is deteriorating the basic conditions to be called a democracy, and that you need to pay attention. And nobody paid attention. Up until 2014, when we called for the protests, a lot of political scientists and philosophers and journalists and analysts spoke about Venezuela as an interesting democratic experiment. They spoke about Venezuela as a new type of direct democracy, or a tropical democracy, or an improvement to democracy. And then some critics started to say, well, Venezuela is a competitive authoritarianism. That's an oxymoron. And then they started saying, well, Venezuela is a democracy in decay. But there was not the determination to call things by their name. This is either democracy or dictatorship. And that really harmed us. That really harmed us, because there was no determination from outside and from within to call things by its name. And today, everybody's very clear that Venezuela is not a democracy. But it took a lot of years, a lot of suffering, a lot of deterioration in order for the international community to understand that Venezuela was no longer a democracy.
So one of the pleas you've made is that Venezuela's sort of struggle is not just simply Venezuela's, that it requires other countries and especially the democracies. Does that, given the history of the United States and Latin America, is that sort of a mixed bag? I mean, because the history of the United States and Latin America is not uniformly acclaimed. And does that also hurt you when you say that you align closely, or you need the support of the United States as the world's most powerful democracy, given American history in Latin America?
Well, I mean, history is history, and what happened in the way it happened, and you need to learn the lessons from what happened. But I think that things can be done in a way where you can promote, defend democracy, and I understand the criticisms of U.S. policy towards Latin America in the past, but I do not share the anti-Americanism as the way to have a political position internally. And I am very against the anti-Americanism position, because that will lead us nowhere. I think that we need to have a way of understanding our hemisphere that has a very strong weight of the United States. And I think the United States needs to look at the hemisphere as a hemisphere that needs to be an example of democracy and of promoting the well-being of the large majorities through democracy and a market economy that understands that there are inequalities that need to be addressed, that need to open for opportunities. But I think that we should not allow to open spaces for authoritarian regimes, and I think that needs to be a commitment of the people in the United States, and of course of the U.S. foreign policy. Because if you are convinced that democracy, the rule of law, is the best way to promote the well-being of the large majorities, and that those are values that you are willing to uphold in every circumstance, you need to be coherent. You need to be coherent, and I think that. And this is not about right or left, Democrats or Republicans. This is about being coherent with what are your own principles written in your constitution, written in your own laws, about why democracy is worth defending. Because trust me, if you don't defend democracy today, 10, 20, 50 years down the line, the authoritarianism is going to take over, and it might take over the United States as well. Because democracy ceased to be the ideal that we need to support. And I think that that's a threat that we are facing today, because the discussion is along the issues of trade or economic policy or economic well-being, and human rights and democracy issues are being put aside as a motivation for policy. So I do believe in the need for the commitment, not just of the United States, but I can tell you a country like Canada, that's even further away from Venezuela, has become a great supporter of our cause, and because they have a foreign policy that is very value-oriented, and I have learned to admire foreign policies that are value-oriented.
Okay. Does it hurt you though that
Okay. Hey, Professor, I need to, I have another meeting that is starting in a couple of meetings.
okay?
So I'm super sorry. This is.
Oh, no. Well, look, we are so thankful that you've just taken the time with us. It's been wonderful. Let me, there's a question, I'm going to paraphrase it and probably do it poorly. So whoever, posed the question, I apologize in advance, but let me just end with this. And it goes back to something we said earlier in our conversation, where you said, look, that you didn't see, in a sense, people as becoming evil fully formed, right? That evil emerges over time as good moral impulses get corrupted. And the question is does that realization give us a basis to build on what we can call a post-conflict democratic society, that we can, is there room in there for a kind of forgiveness? Is there room in there to build back a sense of common purpose? Is there room in there to build back a sense of empathy and identity with people who previously may have done terrible wrong?
No, that's a necessity. I mean, there is no way to look forward if you always are looking back. There's no way, and there needs to be not just the tools of a transitional justice system, but there needs to be the determination and the leadership. And this is something that I always speak with our people, that I spent 7 years with my freedom confined, and I have no resentment, absolutely no resentment. And I think that we need to be very, very clear that our motivation for what we do is not resentment. And we need to deal with the sentiments all the time, because as I said before, we have suffered. I have, people, my friends, my buddies, have been put into prison. Of my own political party, more than 100 people were political prisoners. I've had very, very close friends that have been assassinated because of our fight. And I have a lot of reasons, and our group has a lot of reasons to have hatred as our motivation. But I think that the way to channel things towards reconciliation and to look to the future has a lot to do with leadership. Unfortunately, for the past 20 years, we have had a leadership in our country that has used resentment, division as the core elements of their discourse and example. And we need to be very conscious that we are obliged to put an alternative discourse based in tolerance, in hope, in looking to the future, in inclusion, as the values or the core of the conversation that needs to happen in Venezuela. And I'm absolutely convinced about this.
Well, I think one of the things that you've just done is you've defined the difference between run-of-the-mill political leaders and great ones. Is that they have that vision to look beyond the conflict of the day and to see a kind of reconciliation and to understand how to build there. And with that, Leo, I would very much like to thank you for what has been, for me, just an absolutely fascinating morning. I hope that other people have, sort of shared my gratitude for your ability or your willingness to talk with us, not just simply about Venezuela, but also some very deep and personal matters. And I think that it has been enlightening. It has been wonderful. And I would like to close by just simply thanking you and wishing you all the best.
Thank you very much. And I hope next year I can go back to Gambia, and more than willing. And again, thanks to Kenyon.
I think it would be great.
It's a great place. And again, I'm very grateful of you, Professor, and your team. And I hope we can meet again in Gambia next year. And thank for all of those that were connected today.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Leo, and best of luck. And we'll see one another in person soon.
Ciao.